Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics with our final tier as a part of our preseason preview for this upcoming OUA season. It is the A tier, aka championship tier. If you've been following along, you know the only two teams we have left to talk about are the Western Mustangs and the Laurier Golden Hawks. Tom, we talked about this in the last pod about Queens, about Windsor. This group of four teams, they're all in a neighborhood of just outstanding football only. But these two teams are a cut above, if only by the fact that they were playing in that championship game last year. These teams are chocked with talent across the board, coaching staffs that have everyone in place to go on a run. So many things to talk about, but not before I say those magic words. Tom, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
You switched it up. I thought you were going to go right into it without asking me how you were doing. Oh my God. I'm doing well, my man. I'm doing well. You almost threw me for a loop, but I'm doing well.
This is some serious time football we're talking about here. It just kind of took over a little bit. I had to right the ship a little bit. But Tom, these are two teams that we'll kind of do the preamble. We'll do kind of where these teams were at, and sort of the trajectory they've been on. And just two teams that just in this decade, Laurier more so in the last 2 years have really been exemplifying just what it is to run a program, a football program, for all to model, none more than Western. We'll go through the last 3 years, highlight where these two teams have been. We'll go into the details after that. Let's start with your reigning three-time in a row Yates Cup champion, Western Mustangs. In 2021, they go 5-1 in the COVID shortened year. This is again something that you and I kind of had to do a double take on. That's the year Guelph beats them in the regular season when Jackson White was the starter at the beginning of the season. They make the switch to Evan Hillock and never lose a football game in an Ontario OUA matchup. Then again, they beat Queens in the Yates Cup in 21. They go on the run to take out Sask in the Vanier Cup. Evan Hillock picking up the MVP for that one. They follow that up in 2022, going 8-0 and taking out Queens again for a second year in the Yates Cup. Of course, that's the year that that London was hosting their first Vanier Cup, and London maybe got a little cocky in that Mitchell Bowl. They drop a game to Laval, who ends up then winning against Saskatchewan again. Sorry, Huskies. In London's own house. That was brutal. Followed up in 2023. Last year, we see them go 8-0, take out Laurier in the Yates Cup, and then fall a little bit in a little bit of a disappointing fashion against the Montreal Carabin, of course, the future Vanier Cup champs again. So in the last 3 years, Western has either been the Vanier Cup champ or lost to the Vanier Cup champ in the semifinals. Not too bad. When you roll in their neighborhood and with the rarefied air they play in, though, standards are pretty high. We've talked about those standards. But let's talk about those Laurier Golden Hawks. 2021, it's a 3-3 season. Again, everyone went 3-3 in 2021. They lose in the quarterfinals to the Guelph Griffins. We talked about this on another pod. 2021 might have been the height of the Shan era of Guelph football. They beat Western in the regular season, and then they beat Laurier in the playoffs. 2022, Laurier goes 5-3, beat Carleton in the first round, a game that you called, and then lose in London in the semifinals against the Western Mustangs. Last year, they go 7-1, falling in the final game of the regular season, a game that we both picked them to win, a game that I was sitting there live taking some strays, not even strays, some direct hits from people who knew me. About picking Laurier, and then we doubled down picking them in the Yates Cup, and that didn't prove beneficial for us either, though I don't regret a single word spoken. This is the team that, of course, has the Dutch rifle himself, reigning MVP of the OUA, Taylor Elgersma. Tom, that's where these teams have been. Where are they at right now?
When you start getting into this echelon of things, and I feel like you and I are both very positive people. First and foremost, we're talking about all of the teams that we have previously, about where we think they can get going, and this is where the potential and all this stuff. We're in the championship level here. Quite frankly, anything less than a 7-1 regular season is a failure at this point in time. Like the pressure could not be higher. Western obviously trying to go for the four straight OUA championships, Yates Cup championships. That has not been done since, Greg Marshall did it at McMaster. So guys got a little bit of experience doing that, but still, it's been a very long time since something like that has happened. And you know that the ponies are only ever looking at championships as their way to gauge how well a season went. And Laurier has been to the game. They've been to the dance. They have not been able to shake off that big Western monster. Coming close in certain times, certainly in certain quarters, really showcasing their stuff, but they have not been able to get the job done against the Western Mustangs. And that is the number one thing standing in their way to get to where they want to be. If you want to play your very last game in Kingston for the Vanier Cup, you have to beat Western. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of other teams in between that you got to beat as well, but you have to get that purple pony off of your back to get there.
The 401 may end in Windsor, but the U Sports season certainly ends in Kingston this year, much like it did last year. Tom, I mean, you said it perfectly. You know, we said something to that effect in talking about Windsor and Queens on yesterday's pod, that at the end of the day, even if we think these four teams can all beat each other, you know, you get one shot. You know, of course, you maybe two, including the playoffs, but it just, even if we think Laurier is better on paper, and we're about to talk about those names on paper that can give people, that definitely make people in the K-Dub area really excited for this club.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean a thing until the whistle blows and the game is kicked off. This is a Laurier team. Let's start with them. Let's pay the respect that is due to the Western Mustangs by talking about them last. Save the proverbial best for last. Is a team still led under the leadership of Coach Michael Falds, Ron Van Moorkirk, Todd Galloway, and a slew of other incredible coaches who've now been there, established this culture, and really formed an identity. I think what really blew our minds learning of late, because as of date of recording, Laurier is the only team to have posted their roster
Mhm.
on the offensive side of the ball. And this was a hell of a defense last year. And we're going to talk about two names missing from that defense that
Mhm.
certainly are going to be a blow for them. They're hell of a defense, but this offense was what turned heads all the way around last year, and they return every single player that suited up from them in 2023. Tom, like, I'm trying to think of an example, like, you know, go back to your years at Mac, if there's anything that can approximate that. At Guelph, even those years we were making runs, there would always be a guy or two switching up here or there. This is this is like nothing else. And to add in a little bit before I let you speak on it, ramps up the pressure a little bit more.
Mhm.
This offense was so explosive last year, Tom, with the MVP leading the way for them and a great cast of players supporting him. Like I can't think of a comparison for a team being able to be that effective and return everyone the following year.
No, the closest thing that I can come to that I can think of myself, obviously the team that I was a part of in that 2011 Vanier Cup winning McMaster team, even in 2012, where every single person believed that we could repeat again, we still lost players, either because they were aged out or whatever the case may be, but we still lost players. To have a team with this kind of caliber and one of the top performing offenses in the country return every single player is unheard of. I don't even remember the last time that anything like that has ever happened. To have guys like Tanner Nelms, Quentin Scott, Cooper Hamilton, all of those guys are back along with Taylor Elkersma and that passing game. It's unbelievable to hear like everyone will be back. There's an extra year of performance underneath them. There's a lot of hunger. And listen, nobody, nobody returns the entire side of the ball unless you believe that you're building something, unless you believe that you can really do something special this year. All of those guys are back because they've got championships on their mind and they believe that they can do it. That's why they came back.
And if there was one question mark, and we had the pleasure of having Jack Moore on our preview
Mhm.
podcast about Laurier last year, and he went through every position group, and he was totally right in saying you have a top two, top three guy at every position. The only question mark we had, despite obviously having a top tier and a guy like Cooper Hamilton, was what, that offensive line hasn't been spectacular. You return Hamilton and then just have just this group that it gets another year of gelling together, and of course underneath the tutelage of coach Zach Scotto,
Mhm.
offensive line coach there, who does a tremendous job for them in that regards. And one of the things that we talked about this on the B tier podcast, how again, despite how fantastic like Elgersma's year last year, that MVP run was really solidified by that middle of the season run he went on, where they go into Guelph, that 60-21 game that, again, we were saying just looked like running a 7v7 Skelly. Heck, maybe the defense was even short a guy. Then
Mhm.
what they did in Waterloo and Mac all in succession. He has a good game against Ottawa and Windsor. Like this run he went on where he was putting up historic numbers. But the season started with, a game in Queens and Carleton where, again, bit of an underperformance. But he obviously has all the talent in the world, and like we could just talk about him, but it's what this offense is able to do around him that's so impressive. Because though I don't have the game specifically in front of me, if you recall last year, there's obviously games where it's Elgersma, it's Thorne, it's Jordan, and they're doing their thing. They're putting up those historic numbers. But then there would be games here and there, I should have pulled them up, where, you know what? Whether it's a function of the defense honing in on Thornton and Jordan, or just whatever, the offense is trying to spread out the wealth, where all of a sudden, ooh, Leomi Ojitalayo, he's looking really good. A guy like Jace Atkinson, a guy like Jackson Stebbings is really
Mhm.
stepping up and having a game that is just like, wait a minute, you mean when we tried to take away Jordan and Thorne, if you can even do that to begin with, they can go to like all these other dudes, let alone the fact like some of these guys they're handing the ball off to. And again, even from that standpoint, it starts with Quentin Scott. You talk about what Tanner Nelms does, but then even a guy in Darian Bassick Hayden, where the weapons are out of this world. On top of all that, the fact that, Taylor Elgersma is the OUA's Josh Allen. And so if he wants to, he'll run it and run you over in the process. This offense is like, I don't like, I guess let me throw this question to you. And it's, I didn't give you a chance to prepare, but like, if you're in a defensive meeting going into a game against them, sometimes you talked about this with Queen. Sometimes the philosophy is let's just do our thing as best we can. Sometimes the philosophy is what is their weakness? How do we attack them? Let's not play into their hands. Let's just say, you know what? That right side of the line, that's where they're weak. That's where we can exploit them. Or, you know what? If we can get them into these matchups against these coverages or these types of blitz looks, for my money, and again, I know I'm putting you on the spot, I there there just isn't really a weakness. You could say the passing game's stronger than the run game, but it's not a weak run game. You could say that the offensive line isn't the best in the OUA. It's not a bad O line. I
Mhm.
don't think there's a weakness on this O line. Pardon me, on this offense.
No, and I think that I think you're absolutely right. The only spot that I would say um where Western has certainly come out to play and really done their thing. We talked about last year, man, Western really didn't seem to have a consistent pass rush at all. They weren't really able to do anything. And then that regular season game, they get 5 sacks. I don't think they had 10 sacks all year round. So they got the majority of their entire team sacks in that one game against Taylor, and they're getting after them and they're pressuring him and they're doing everything you can because realistically, that's your best opportunity. That's your best chance to limit this dude is by getting him on his back as often as possible. If he's thinking about a pass rush or if he's thinking about, hey, I got to get this ball out quick or whatever, then obviously that's going to affect things. And when you have a team like Western where really, and we'll get into this obviously a little later on, where we're just talking about, that pass rush was maybe the weak part of their defense. With that involved, and then you've got guys like Lowers Bowers Kane in the backfield, and then you've got guys like Jackson Finley in the defensive secondary, and you're like, well, hell, if you're forcing passes against this defensive secondary that's one of the best in the nation, you're going to get into some bad scenarios, even if it's a pass breakup or worst case an interception. So I really think that O-line was where we saw, maybe there's a little bit something here, but for the most part, this offense in particular is dangerous no matter where you look at.
Yeah, and Western fans, yeah, I heard you when you called us out for saying that Western didn't get to the quarterback. And then yeah, as you said, they sack Elgersma 5 times. We've had the pleasure of getting to talk with Elgersma a few times. Big fan of the young man, big fan of the
Mhm,
family. His dad's an awesome guy. I almost feel like though, because he's such a competitor, he's so intense that and again, like this, I have no basis in a conversation to substantiate this, and just a little bit of just like thinking about again how you can maybe say, how do we slow this guy down, which is to say, you know what, he might be the type of guy where because he's such a competitor, you might be able to coax him into doing some hero ball stuff, being like, have him take a couple extra hits running the ball, be like, great, you want to scramble for 20 yards, go ahead, we'll do that, and we will knock you on your arse every single time. And just knowing that he is that type of competitive, and over the years, having talked Coach Faulds, having talked Coach Galloway, teased them a few times, seeing them, this is going back even 2 years now, of like, hey, he is so sublime, maybe teach him to slide. And their whole thing is like, you don't get Taylor if you do that. Like,
mhm.
not to say that Taylor is going to be like, no, make me, I must. It's just, it's in his DNA. That's how this kid plays football. You don't get the incredible upside if you don't also run that risk of like, seeing him go into some of these hits and being like, I know you're like 6'5", 240, but golly, dude, like, come on now.
Ugh.
Um, so maybe that's where it is. But this offense, as you said, as we've said, is darn near ironclad. But let's look at the defense, because if we're gonna play the game of, man, how do we've done this game with other teams of like, how do you replace so and so? We start on the line of scrimmage, and of course, Luke Brubaker doing his thing in the black and gold for your Tie Cats. Well, yeah, as Tom grimaces, he's a rookie. We shouldn't put the pressure on him. There's some other issues going on there, but
Yeah.
doing his thing at the next level. He's gone along with Ife Onyemenenum, who, if he wasn't the best linebacker in the province last year, uh had to have been too.
Mhm.
Those guys are hard to replace, and we should talk about their impact. But I'll set you up by also adding in that you don't just lose those two guys. We've mentioned this before when we talked about the Ottawa Gigi. You pick up our dude, number 5, playing for the Laurier Golden Hawks, Harnur Dollywall, transferring in from Ottawa. We obviously see him go down in that week 2 game against U of T. Um, what an addition this is. We obviously have to address Brubaker and Onyemenenum being out of
Mhm.
that program. And obviously there are a ton of other guys that make that defense so special. Coach Von Moorcork, no less than anyone else. But you lose those two guys, you add in Dollywall. What are you thinking about with this defense from what we've just seen so far in terms of off-season movement?
I think you and I have always had this conversation when it comes to Laurier, in that somehow, some way, every single year, regardless of the guys who graduate or move on, the front seven is one of the best aspects of this team, no matter what. You've had the amount of outstanding linebackers and defensive linemen from guys like Kwaku Boateng and all of these dudes, even from when you and I played, and for them to leave, and obviously you lose a guy like a Boateng, you're not just going to replace him immediately, but the guy who's right behind him wasn't any worse. He wasn't bad. You know what I mean? Like, it's there. I have full confidence that while you don't just replace a Luke Brubaker and an Onyemenenum, I don't think they're really going to take that big of a step back with whoever it is that they decide to really lean on with these guys. I have total confidence in there. And if the front seven is really the lifeblood of that defense, you look back in the defensive secondary, and like you said, with the addition of Harnu Dollywall and all of the amazing things that we saw him do with Ottawa in his previous years there, I am really, really excited for everything that we could potentially be seeing. Obviously, Jahari Hastings out there, he's another outstanding piece of this. Malikote Azor, like, they've got some outstanding players that can already ball and they can already be in there. I mean, there was a reason why they were, I think, top two, top three defense all OUA last year. This is a damn good team. This is a damn good defense. And I don't think that they're really going to take all that big of a step back, even with the personnel changes.
Now, I think you're totally right. And there's a few other guys that we'll talk about. A name that's actually is dawning on me that you and I kind of glanced over in this is that Nico McCarthy's gone too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So that Dollywall pickup is huge for the
mm-hmm,
defense, and as well, specifically with him solidifying that secondary. Of course, you mentioned guys like Hastings and Kote Adzor, guys like Ethan Bayfield who've been in that secondary for a couple of years now as well, doing their thing. But yeah, McCarthy's a big loss as well. Thus, boon making Dollywall that much of a boon as well. Now we said, of course, with Anya Meninum, if he wasn't the best linebacker, he had to be number two. And his impact in Laurier is going to be known for generations to come, and perhaps none more so directly than him being able to spend a year, coach along young number 52, Ethan Grigorsich, linebacker out of Cordes, Ontario, who did everything Jack Moore promised he would, and then more, if only just because, like, the potential that Jack had described he had, it all came true, but actually seeing it was believing it. Because for a rookie linebacker to do the things that he did, and I think you were really discerning in being able to show where his youth what would show at times,
mm-hmm,
and that's totally fair.
mm-hmm,
But his upside, not just upside, what he was able to do last year was, just being biased towards guys I play with, I think of what a guy like John Rush did, coming into the OUA, Nick Shorthill
mm-hmm,
with you guys at Mac, other guys, Fraser Sopik at Western is doing his thing now with the Argos. These are the names we're talking about. Jack Kasser from Carleton. If we want to just keep doing the game of naming guys that just maybe we should just do that because that's really exciting. But Ethan Grigorsich, what he was able to do last year playing next to Anya Meninum, and you know what? Maybe it's a year early, but with Brubaker gone as well, he's in that linebacking core. Is it fair to say that Van Moorkirk is like, all right, hey, the keys are yours now, young man. Let's
mm-hmm.
go.
Yeah, I think we were obviously watching him very closely ever since we had Jack Moore on the pod. And Jack, when it comes to Laurier football, is something of a mind reader. He can see into the future, especially on a player by player basis. He told us two names to look out for: Ethan Grigorsich and Leomi Ojatalayo, and both of them had stellar years. With obviously Grigorsich coming back with a OUA Rookie of the Year. Damn well should have been a U Sports Rookie of the Year, but we've gone into that at detail as well. Regardless, having those guys back, I don't know if you look at Gregorsis and say, here are the keys to the castle as of yet. There
Mm.
were still a couple of things that we saw last year. He's over pursuing at times, getting out of position, just rookie things that happen that he probably already fixed by the end of the season anyway, so he's that much better for it. But having guys back there in that defensive secondary in particular, having a guy like Harnour who's going to come in and then immediately be a contributor to this defense as well, who has seen live bullets with Ottawa and who has really been a part of some stellar defenses himself. I think there's a lot of guys there that are really going to be, you can lean on them. And even if they do give Grigorsich the, you're going to be the play caller, you're going to be the man in the middle for us, he's got so many outstanding players that he can lean on as well. I think that this defense is really going to be, I don't know if you're going to look at this defense and go like, oh my God, this one in particular player is just doing unbelievable things, like a 60 tackle year or anything along those lines. And even Anya Meninum, he finished, I believe, with 36 and a half total tackles. I don't know his stats off the top of my head, but was still a first team all Canadian. So this defense is going to really rely on itself. I think it's a pretty complete defense if we're talking things through here. And I'm really interested to see how they come out, what's their mentality going to be. With guys like we just detailed in the defensive secondary, you can afford to be more aggressive, sending blitz pickups. If you've got guys who can handle one-on-one coverage with elite wide receivers, you can send five, you can send six, and you just rely, hey, you know what? I got Harnur, I got Malik, I got Jahari Hastings. We're good. I can rely on these guys. We're okay. You guys go have your fun. Sack the quarterback as often as possible.
Definitely. And, we talked about Brubaker being gone. They still have an absolute load to deal with, and Chisenham and Sidham on the
Mhm.
front line there for that defense. So, no lacking of talent, even despite losing the names that we've listed on the front, middle, and secondary of that defense. Before we move into the schedule, the sort of upside, downside, best case scenario, worst case scenario, I should say, for the year. Talking about returning players, of course, they are returning one Jason McGugan. The ball does not appear in the holder's name just magically. But though I'd love to turn this into a long snapping corner, I think there's something to be said about we're in championship tier with two teams right underneath that we've already staked our claim, are right there in the mix, knives out, looking to take out the champ. Um, Dawson Hodge.
Mhm.
This is a guy who at his best is all Canadian, and there's no doubting that. I should have pulled the numbers up. Maybe I can get them here in a second, or maybe you'll do me that honor as I ramble for a little moment here. Was had a disappointing year last year. Um, I really don't know how else to put it, and I don't know what to chalk it up to. We even took it as far, and this was our own prognosticating, and I'm sure everyone at Laurier would deny this. That doesn't mean it might not be true, but when his field goal range was not as reliable as it was the other years, it was worth the conversation that this might even change the way you call your offense. And as we've already said, this is an offense. Well, so what? Like, whatever. We'll just keep our offense on. Like, what we don't need to. We don't settle for threes to begin with. When you're in that territory, though, where you're just taking out Windsor in the semifinal game. You know, when you're playing a team like Western, it's coming down the stretch. You need to have, like, this is the thing. Champions don't happen by mistake. These are teams that fire on all cylinders, and that kicking game, whatever it was, just wasn't as effective as it had been years past. And I'm not saying this to put the pressure on Hodge. If they do not, to use some terminology we use back in Guelph, if they don't plant the flag this year on top of that OUA hill as Yates
Mhm.
Cup champions, aside from a few very specific situations, it's not fair to say, well, everything else went well and it's on Hodge. That's not what I'm saying. But again, if you are going to be trying to compete for OUA supremacy and then some with the other teams we know are coming out of the conferences across Canada, you can't be having a guy where it's like, you know what? He's having a bit of a down year. He doesn't need to be all Canadian necessarily, but come on now. That was something of a concerning point.
Most definitely. On the year, Laurier 10 for 18 on field goals, 55% for in both Western games in the regular season and in the Yates Cup. He had two field goal opportunities and missed both of them. Let me remind you, folks, that that Laurier lost the regular season game 33-30. And so that is not his fault. I want to be very, very clear. Kickers are people too. That's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that 100%. But to truly be elite as an elite level caliber team, your kicking game needs to be just as good as your offense and your defense. How many times have we seen teams on paper? Oh my gosh, look at this offense, look at this defense. They looks fantastic. And then special teams in general, not just the kicker, but special teams in general isn't there. And that can kill teams, especially later on in the season here. So it's not like we're saying, oh, Dustin Hodge is no good. He was a freaking all Canadian a couple years ago. He has the capabilities of it. Whatever you got to do, get your mojo back, young man, because Laurier is really going to need you down the stretch here.
Absolutely. Tom, should we look at the schedule?
Let's do it.
Beautiful. They start off on the road, a game that, Tom, you and I will be in attendance for a little 7 p.m. nightcap on August 24th, starting the season off at Ron Joyce against your McMaster Marauders. September 4, the Laurier Golden Hawks is home against Guelph, home against Western, on the road for Waterloo, then home against Ottawa. Their October is home against Queens, and then they finish up going to one side of the province to take on the Windsor Lancers, and then going all the way to the other side of the province to take on the Carleton Ravens. Tom, I still feel confident when we said that Queens has the toughest schedule on the
Mm-hmm.
year.
Mm-hmm.
This ain't far behind it, and of course that Waterloo game at Waterloo, essentially it's the Battle of Waterloo. So kind of similarly with the Ottawa teams when it's like, oh, Ottawa's hosting Carl, it's kind of a moot point in that regard, but it is what it is. You just deal with it. And obviously it's great that we get those types of rivalry games. But like, to state the obvious, at Mac, home for Guelph, and a Guelph team that, we're prognosticating to being better than they were the last couple years, but certainly out for revenge. Western, I mean, say no more. But then even looking at what Ottawa was able to play them close, how they were able to play them close last year, and I think the year before too, and then finish up going to Carleton. Depending on how the season looks when that rolls around, not many gimmies, not many gimmies. Now, of course, this is a team that like we think is going to be firing as effectively as any other in the league. So at the end of the day, we are undoubtedly, barring whatever comes to pass that might influence what we think of these games week to week when they come to bear. Um, like this is a team that's should be favored in all these games, save for if you want to say Western, but it's Western playing in KW. Anyhow, Tom, best case, worst case scenarios when we look at this upcoming schedule for the Laurier Golden Hawks.
Well, with the caliber of player that we've been talking about, with the expectations the way that they are, of course, best case scenario for these Laurier Golden Hawks is 8-0. Of
100%.
course. You run the table, you get the job done. And I think realistically, when we're looking here, I was at the spring scrimmage that Laurier and McMaster did last year in April, and Taylor, I leaned over to my family, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you cover these guys. Like, what? Give us a story, whatever." And I said, "You see number 13 out there throwing for Laurier? He's the best player on the field right now." And you see him showcase his stuff, and he did some good things. Mac did some good things as well, but there was a lot of pushing and shoving. There was a couple of fights that were there and had to get broken out. And you go back and you see, oh, maybe you're gonna get under Taylor's skin. Maybe he's gonna make a mistake in that. Dude just got pissed off and started throwing absolute darts. So know that first game at Mac, there's going to be some bad blood there, I'm sure. The Guelph game, the reason why one of the reasons why Taylor said he went off is because there was a little bit of a jawing back and forth before the game started between some of the Griffins and some of the Laurier guys. So know that there's bad blood on both sides. Obviously, Western. If you don't wear that same Western purple, you don't like Western. You've never liked Western. You don't like anything about them. So that's the game. You circle that on the calendar and you go, oh God, you got to catch that. The Battle of Waterloo right afterwards against Ottawa, against Queens. And then, like you said, finishing off the very last 2 games of the season, traveling across the province to Windsor and then to Carleton. I think regardless of everything that's there, regardless of the insane travel at the very end of it, it is very possible, not just very possible, it's very likely that this team goes 8-0 and runs the table that's here. The only thing that I'm really, just purely from a scheduling standpoint and just kind of looking at this, the thing that I'm really interested in is that Windsor game is at 7 o'clock at night. Do you travel the same day and just play that game and then go from there? Or are the coaches for Laurier's, Coach Falls and Coach Galloway, looking at that going, we're not taking any chances. I want to travel the day before. We'll hang out for the majority of the day, do some chalk talk, do whatever else, and then play the game. That is, and I've confirmed this with a few coaches. People have been talking. That is one of the Windsor specials or the Carleton or the Ottawa specials. When you're playing against a very good team or any team that has to travel, the home team will try and schedule it as late back as they can to try and force those teams to say, you know what, we'll just travel the same day.
I
It won't
love
be
that.
too bad. The long travel directly into game day, that affects players for sure. Even if you go to the hotel the night before, that can still get into your head a little bit because it is an away game. But you and I both know how much of a pain in the butt it can be sitting on a bus for, even if it's just 3 or 4 hours, and having to play the same day against the team rather than You travel the night before, you stay overnight, you get refreshed, you get ready to go, and then you go out and play.
Even still doing that, you wake up on Windsor on October 11th. You have the whole day. Like that's too much
The
time to even.
whole day.
That's too much time to be in Windsor. It's too much time to not be in Windsor. God dang it! I love you, JP Cercelli. That's balling. Now, yeah, but nonetheless, this team has the potential and all the reason that we should be confident that they can take out every team on their schedule. The worst case scenario, a healthy 6-2,
Mm-hmm.
real healthy
Mm-hmm.
6-2. And let's be realistic. It has to start with that game pardon me, against Western at Laurier, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if they lose that, man, that stinks. But really, if you're a Laurier, you care about beating Western in the playoffs. Really, that's what it matters this year. And I think if there are situations in the end of this season with some of the matchups we have, and based on how seeding and everything works out, like there's going to be some interesting decisions coaches make where, again, we have four clubs who all think that they should be winning a Yates Cup and what types of tinkering and what philosophies are coaches bringing to the table in terms of how they best prepare for that. So it's like, you know what, you lose that game against Western, that stinks, but totally can happen, right? They beat you twice last year. And then you look at that home stretch, home against Queens, at Windsor, at Carleton, hey, we're saying worst case scenario, and maybe you beat Western there, but then that travel at the end, plus that Queens team coming into your barn, that's tough. But we have the confidence with everything we've been saying and with the institutional knowledge this team has in their coaching ranks and the championship medal that there's no reason they can't run the table. And that again, that we're setting that floor still fairly optimistically, especially knowing that this team has has Yates Cup and beyond in their estimation. I'll still never forget getting to interview 5 years ago uh, Romy Simpson and Ayo Ajayi, and them talking about how Falls runs their practices. They lighten it up a little bit, but they run their practices through the end of their season, end of the season being whenever they get knocked out, given that in the last, well, however many years it's been since they've been in Vanier, hasn't taken them to that final game, knowing that that is their expectation. So every year they want to prepare for that. I love that from a team, even though there's the part of me as a player that was a player being like, man, even if your season ends a little disappointingly in the quarterfinals, just give the kids a break. It's a hard season, man. 8-0, 6-2. Tom, I feel like let's talk about Western, and in that, we'll just keep talking about Laurier as well once we get through some of the more Western specific details. How's that sound to you?
That sounds great to me, my man.
Brilliant. Well, we talked about already how the last 3 years were looking for Western. And again, they ended in Yates Cup championships and either winning a Vanier or losing to the eventual Vanier Cup champion. Though it does sting that both those times they were hailing from the RSEQ. Put that aside. Let's go to the roster. Tom, this one is a little harder to decipher than it was for Laurier because Western hasn't updated their roster just yet. We were talking about some of these names, though. What are some of our suspicions of guys that we're confident won't be there, guys that we're more on the fence about, and just everything in that realm?
So the big two pieces, especially from that offense that we've been talking about, are Keon Edwards and Savon Magne-Jones. Those two guys have just simply aged out. They came into the program in 2018, and even with the COVID year, last year was their fifth year. So very confident that those two guys should be gone. There could be something else. Maybe they didn't play in 2018. Maybe there's some trickery that can come here, but we're fairly confident that those two guys are gone. On the defensive side of things, Max Nixon is also in that same caliber. However, he did not play in 2018. He does not have any stats or any games played assigned to him for that year, so he could be back on that side of the ball. But even if it's just Keon Edwards, because he did have some playing, I believe. Even just to lose Keon Edwards is a massive blow. Obviously, the OUA MVP a couple of years ago. He is a outstanding player, and Savon Magne-Jones was one of the main focal points on that passing attack. So to lose both of those guys is a massive blow. But Western being Western, they've got guys who are easily ready to step up. Mohsen Jamal obviously had a massive year last year. Seth Robertson, Braden Masseri. The passing game's going to be all right. Keanu Yazbek shared a lot of the load, especially with Keon Edwards being out. So you know that the run game's still going to be there. Eric Anderson, I believe, is going to be back. That entire O-line should be back for them as well. And arguably the best O-line in the OUA. So I'm very confident that Western is going to be just as damn good as they've always been.
Definitely. You mentioned Keanu Yazbek. I think from where we stand right now, it's weird to think that and weird's the wrong word because I don't mean this to be demeaning of Yazbek, but the thought of like, yeah, he's gonna be their bell cow for the year. I mean, in reality, this should have been Edward Winati. Like,
Mhm.
things haven't always gone to plan for Western. I'm pretty sure they'd hope that, like, when, Edwards hung him up, when Naughty was going to be the guy. Obviously, that didn't go so smoothly. But also seeing a guy like Troy Thompson, what he was able to do
Mhm.
with some carries, some younger guys, my guy, Marcel Phillips, love you dearly. And a young guy from St. Thomas, the London area, in Ethan Dolby. But I mean, you mentioned that O line, and obviously our guy, Eric Anderson, just being a stalwart there, battling some injuries last year, really just hoping beyond all hope for purely selfish reasons, knowing the guy, not for the success of Western. um but to see him back there healthy. But again, an O-line that, especially with him being out, we were at times somewhat skeptical of, but say what you want, for us to say what we want. I mean, you still end up with guys like Alex Berwick and Keegan O'Neill receiving awards as the top dogs on the O-line for this group. And so, if Anderson's back, I think the big thing with us last year was just like thinking about, losing Zach Fry and Philip Grahovic and Elliot Beamer along with Eric Anderson. That is an O-line that wins Vanier Cups. And
Mhm.
they did. Aside from Anderson, we just weren't sure they were at that level. These guys have obviously proven their worth beyond anything that we're deserving of. They don't need to prove anything to a couple bozos like us. We know a bit of what we're talking about. But that extra year to gel certainly makes them an O-line to reckon with.
Mhm.
We've yet to mention though the name of the guy, the proverbial straw that stirs the drink, makes it all happen, in Evan Hillock.
Mhm.
Tom, Evan, like I'm I've loved getting to cover every moment of his career. And so I say that not and so I say what I'm gonna say, not looking forward to the day he's no longer playing OUA football because the league will be lesser as a result, but because it'll be so fascinating when it's all said and done and we can examine everything that's gone on without any expectation of more to come, of what this young man has been through, and perhaps fewer players. And I think we've done a big part in a role in this, but I think other outlets and the commentary around OUA football started to pick up a lot too. Fewer players have been more criticized than this young man. And arguably, hey, if you're the quarterback for the Western Mustangs, heavy
Mhm.
is the head that wears the crown. And Hillock,
Mhm.
you should be honored that your head has been adorned with that crown. Yet to win an MVP for OUA, but he comes into the league, wins the spot over Jackson White, leads the team to a Vanier Cup, and then repeats two more times in Yates Cups against Queens and then against Laurier. But all everyone wants to say is against Laval in 2022, you
Mhm.
couldn't put up a pass without a play action on the front of it. We go into 2023 and we see obviously they seem to invest more in that passing game in the regular season. It looks spectacular. And then you go into Montreal and a reminder, one of the best defenses that's ever played in U Sports, because that's what the Montreal Carabins, allez les bleus, did last year.
Mhm.
You know what? Made them look a little lesser in that semifinal game in Montreal. And that's all people seem to care about. But so let's talk about Evan. But all the while, his Evan is representative, I think, of just the pressure one may or may not put on this club in entirety. Because on the one hand, hey, Western, y'all have won 3 Yates Cups in a row. That is rarefied air. If you lose in the Yates Cup this year to any of those three teams that are all worthy of a cup and have all given you good games, man, realistically, folks like us, we shouldn't say anything. On the other hand, You've left us wanting in those games beyond the OUA schedule. When you've gone to Montreal, when you've hosted Laval then getting to raise a Vanier Cup on your field. It's incredible to think for a team that's won 3 Yates Cups in a row that they may still have something to prove. Let's talk about Evan. Let's talk about that mentality of what Western has to prove this year, chips that may or may not be on their shoulder. Does this team need to win a Yates and then go make noise in the playoffs? Or are we just going to say, hey, look, the first 4 years of the 2020s, you won 3 Yates Cups, you lost in the fourth when you appeared, and no one can tell you anything.
Yeah, I think the big thing, especially when it comes to Evan Hillock, for all of the crap that this young man gets, he's only ever lost 2 U Sports football games, and both of those, one of them uh was in, well, both of them were in the national semifinals. So we're really going to start splitting hairs against this young man. Certainly he's got a ton of guys who are around him. He's not doing that by himself, but the dude is a winner. And I can see that you want to say something. What do you want to say?
I was just going to add in super quick, in an era of OUA football that we've been saying is been as talented, as full of talent as any other. He came into his career, Trey Ford still playing for Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like just as far as, and then with Windsor's ascension and now duking it out with Taylor Elgersma. And so that's all I wanted to add in super quickly. It's not just like you only lose, you lose when you get out of the OUA. It's been an impressive feat getting out of the OUA these last 3 years as well.
Oh, 100%. It's never easy to get out of the OUA. It's always difficult. In both of our opinions, the most priority in any league. You know, you've got a couple of teams that are on the mountaintop in other leagues here, and in the other games you can have blowouts. And certainly there were blowouts against a certain Toronto team that we don't like to talk about. But for the most part, every game is going to give you some kind of level of challenge, and these Western Mustangs have not lost a game against an OUA team since 2021. And even then, they haven't lost a home game since 2014, which I'm very proud of, because that was my McMaster Marauders that took them out at home. But still, that's insane to think about. In the regular season, these purple ponies are king. And Evan Hillock, it's very funny because as you hinted at, last year Laurier played against Western twice, and you and I both picked Laurier both times, and both times were incorrect. Western fans, they made sure that we heard them. They were in our DMs. They were calling us a variety of words. One of my favorite was, "Grab your dunce caps and get off into the corner. You guys should be talking about Western more and more now." But the big thing for me in particular was, shame on you. You know better. You've coached Evan. And back in the day in 2019, I coached Evan as a part of the Burlington Stampeders, and a few of his St. Thomas More faithful came down from Hamilton and they played with us. And I know firsthand that dude's a gamer. I know firsthand he's a winner, first and foremost. His mentality that he brings to the game, the people that he surrounds himself with, he is a gamer first and foremost. And I heard a lot of people say, "You know better, Tom. Shame on you." So, yeah, contrary to popular belief, especially in the sports world, people don't like winners. They love to see a team get toppled more than anything. They love an underdog story. So this young man, Evan Hillock, in his uh high school, in his education career, let's call it, was undefeated in high school, didn't lose a game in high school, and has since then only lost 2 games, and like I said, both of them in national semifinal scenarios. So yeah, kid's pretty good.
Yeah. Evan, you're an absolute stud. You know, worth noting that of course, like that the STM connection, Hillock to Magne Jones, like that's not nothing. Like he obviously has great rapport with
Mhm.
Jamal and with Robertson, and then with the running game being what it is, that's that's gonna be worth noting. If anything, I bring that up just to shout out actually Savon's dad, who
Mhm.
hooked us up with those stellar long sleeve dry fit shirts they had custom made that I remember seeing Evan wear in a like a IG photo after a game a couple years back. That's Hillock to Magne Jones for a 6. So again, Mark, right? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
correct. Okay, I
Mm-hmm.
know you're
Mm-hmm.
listening, so I'm happy I got that one right. Mark, again,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure even though your son has moved beyond Western Mustangs football, you are still tuning in. Shout out to you for just being a fan, supporting OUA football. Um, we'll probably come back to talking about Evan just as sort of the figurehead of this team. And I'm just gonna put this out into the universe. Like, we need to sit down with Evan and Taylor at some point. Maybe it's when their careers are done. Maybe it's in the off season, because just that would make my millennium. That would be
Mm-hmm.
so cool. But Tom, we talked about, you know, some of the pieces that might not be there. Keon Edwards, I mean, salute to you, Keon. Like, despite all the things we said about that JP Simonkinda year in 2022, you were rightfully that MVP, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
pleasure watching you do your thing. That
Mm-hmm.
offensive line, and of course, all the weapons Evan is going to be throwing the ball out to. But we've yet to talk about their fourth ranked defense in the OUA, and that might sound, a league with 11 teams, fourth isn't the star of the show, if you will. It's a defense that allowed 18.9 points per game, sacked the quarterback 11 times, which again was booned by that last game,
Mm-hmm.
but picked the ball off 14 times, returning it to the house for three. They gave up a shade over 100 yards per game on the ground, and their passing defense was nothing to sneeze at either. This is a defense that it's been such a quintessential defense. For one, it starts just like we've talked about Coach Van Moorkirk, Coach Gleason. That's what this defense is about. This is Coach Gleason's defense.
Mm-hmm.
And in years past, whether it was guys like Deontay Knight, Daniel Valente Jr., we mentioned Fraser Sopik's name, the system, the defense has always been greater than the product itself. But than the names themselves. But those names are also pretty darn stellar.
Yeah.
And we have to start with the guy that we put our name on this, and hey, all the love in the world to Max Carbonneau, reigning President's Trophy award winner. A defense that gets to trot out the best defensive player in all of Ontario. That being one Jackson Finley, and a whole host of other guys. Another year, Gleason at the helm. Finley, who you got to see him up close and personal and get to pick his brain a little bit about his style of play. And of course, a linebacking core that, Nixon were unsure about, but Riley McLeod in there in the middle and Bowers Kane alongside him. Our guy Van Mueldorfer on the front end, and maybe a Dubois back a corner, right? And
Mm-hmm.
other guys as well that we'll get to. This defense is one to be reckoned with, but somehow always seems to lay in the weeds and then get to the end of the season. You're like, oh, right. Yeah, I get it now. This defense is outstanding, Tom. Where does your mind go to thinking about Gleason's defense 24?
I always harken back to my own offensive coordinator, John Behe, when we were getting ready to play against Western every single year, looking at this defense and going, guys, they're not going to out scheme us. They're not going to send a whole ton of blitz packages. They're not going to do twists. They're not going to do anything like that. For the most part, they play a standard 4-3 defense and will just beat you up outright to win the game. With outstanding players, like you've said, year after year after year after year, they're willing to bet that at the end of the game, at the end of 60 minutes, their defense has beat the crap out of your offense more than you have them. And by the way, their offense has always been stellar. So even if they do let a couple of touchdowns here or there, their offense is ready to go right back down the field and not just air raid the ball down the field. No, no. I mean, run the ball down the field and power run down the field and send counter Trey and power G and send three guys at the point of attack, two of them being offensive linemen that can move to wear the hell out of your other your own defense and really establish themselves and flex their muscles. That's what Western is year after year after year. There's never going to be oh my God, look at this unbelievable play calling or look at this unbelievable whatever. They are damn good. They know they're damn good and they're going to flex their muscles on you every single year as well. To go along with that, certainly, I'm not saying that Western's not going to blitz or not going to twist or show another front other than 4-3. They certainly do. But For the most part, it is pretty standard, solid defense. They play solid team defense from top to bottom. And yeah, they've always had star defensive players that come out of there as well. Jackson Finley being the most recent to come out, not even come out, to be in that system. He's automatically, based off of everything that I saw at East West and obviously last year as well, he's got to be in contention at least for a President's Trophy, a lookout at bare minimum going
Love
into the
that. Yeah.
preseason here. He's leads a team and leads a defense that, like you said, is fourth in the OUA, doing some things. Number one in interceptions and only number two in touchdowns off of those turnovers.
Yeah.
So this is a team that really operates at a high level. They do their thing. They don't make mistakes. That's the biggest part about Western offensively, defensively, special teams, is that very rarely do they make mistakes because they're so well coached. And when you have a team that doesn't make a lot of mistakes and that has top quality players from top to bottom, that's a tough challenge every single year. So there is no, oh my gosh, what are we going to do against this or that? Obviously, there's going to be some things. We talked to Taylor about some of the adjustments that they were able to make during some of the halftime of that Western Laurier game, and they're very good at doing those. But for the most part, this is a team where you've got absolute monsters on the D line like Max von Muhldorfer. You've got solid linebacker play with guys like Riley McLeod, Lowers Bowers Kane, and Max Nixon. And you know that you've got a potential President's Trophy winner in the backfield with a guy like Jackson Finley. And don't sleep on Richard Adu before any of those other guys. So this is a defense from top to bottom that is solid.
Add in guys like Jordan Murphy, Chris Cameron Cogler into that secondary. Tom, I love, and again, we read into the stats, and stats don't lie, but depending on, there's context, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, the thing I love when stats bear out like this, because it speaks to, as you said, the interaction between your offense, your defense, and the way that you play the game, like holistically. Talked about that Western gave up just over 100 yards on the ground. That's outstanding. They didn't get to the quarterback as much as, maybe we would have thought. A team that's this good overall, that maybe that was a bit of a weak point. Well, when the chips were on the table, they stepped up. The interception's crazy. Tom, purely based on yards per game in the passing attack, where do you think Western ranked? Like 1 through 11. Like one being that you gave up the most passing yards, 11th being that, like,
you gave up the
no
least.
fly zone. Yeah, 1 through 11.
Yeah.
Where do you think that passing in terms of yards per game are?
Gosh, with guys like Windsor and on Laurier, I'm gonna say third.
I love where your head's at. Second. Again,
No kidding.
meaning that aside from York giving up 331 yards in the air, they were second at 271. Toronto with a 252 behind them. And you know what separates those three teams is that everyone has to throw the ball against Western to try and stay in those games. Now, of course, albeit there's great quarterbacks, there's great air attacking teams in the league that, even with the great guys we named in that secondary for Western, can still get theirs. But part of the reason that they don't give up many rush yards, and they do give up passing yards, and then they get all these interceptions and take some of those to the house, is because, and think about the teams they're competing with, just thinking of Windsor and Queens, great defenses, great running games. That's awesome. But at a certain point, when you got to pass that ball, that defense is ready. And that, again, I just love seeing a stat like that where, to the untrained eye, not to make ourselves seem holier than that, whatever, but you see that and you're like, man, 271, what's that all about? What that's all about is this offense scores points and forces teams to pass the ball, whether they want to or not, going into that game. And then you add in the interceptions, you add in the number of times they took those back to the house. It's it's Western football, right? Like, what more do you want to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes right into what we were saying last podcast. We were talking about Queens going up against Western. You're like, Alex Vreeken threw the ball 45 times. What does that mean? Exactly like what you're saying. Despite the fact that Queens had the best rushing attack all last year, there's a certain point when you look at Western, you go, you know what? Handing the ball off 40 times in the game is not a realistic game plan to really be able to beat the Western Ponies, especially when their front seven is as good as it is. we have to go to the air. And when you go to the air, you leave the ball up to guys like Richard Dubefore and Jackson Finley, who are going to come back down with it eventually. You may get them a few times, and certainly, you don't you don't give up 271.9 yards per game without getting some real traction on offense for sure. But picking off the ball more than anybody else in the OUA, that's not a mistake, for lack of a better term there. So yeah, I completely agree with where you're coming from, and it's always so nice when the things that we say actually back up the things that are out showing on the stat line. It's just chef's kiss.
It's a beautiful thing. Two last names I want to just talk about quickly before we get into the schedule, talk about best case, worst case, and then we'll do like a full preseason
Mhm.
preview pod talking about all these teams. Again, we'll kind of, it's hard to talk about Western and Laurier without talking about the other. And obviously they're the theme of this whole pod. Number one being Brian Garrity.
Mhm.
I'm not too sure if he's back with them. My understanding, I had a beautiful moment in my last year at Western at the Faculty of Education, seeing him, stroll in on one of our open house days. And of course, only like, you know, oh, crazy people like you and me would be the type of people to spot Brian Garrity walking into the Faculty of Education and be like, Mr. Garrity, how you doing? And so I think he again, and not that it's necessarily impossible, he couldn't be at Faculty of Ed and then be doing that, but he might be moving on. That's important. Other name I'm unclear of in terms of eligibility, years played, not having the updated roster is Craig Coleman, who's been playing
Mhm.
H back for them, which if you have any understanding, you did a great job of highlighting how that rushing attack does work for Western. You need an H back. We talked about obviously with Queens with Nicholas Henning playing that same position, how pivotal he is to their success and in
Mhm.
protection as well. Yeah, Coleman being back is massive for them. I don't know if you have any notion of the eligibility or availability of either of those two guys. I see you shake your head, but those are the last two guys that are kind of. I mean, we obviously talked about Dawson Hodge. Kickers matter a heck of a lot in games, especially in Canada, coming into November, close matchups and things like that. But with Western as well, the way they run the ball, having an H back who knows the system, knows all their terminology is pretty major too.
And no, absolutely. And Brian Garrity is in that same realm of he came in 2018, so there's a good chance that he has been aged out, like you said. So another massive part of that, we just spent so much time about Dawson Hodge, and it's funny how the similarities between both of these championship level teams. But yeah, you can't effectively run a Western style offense, especially a Western run game, without having a solid H back or fullback. So it'll be interesting to see who they can get in there and how they can do things. But once again, if there's one thing that you're always confident about, if every single team lost all 24 of their starters on offense and defense, you can be pretty confident that Western is still going to be in the top echelon because of how well they recruit, the aura that's around Western Mustangs just in general, and why kids want to go there and play for a legendary coach in Coach Greg Marshall. So Western is always going to be outstanding. The players that they have returning for sure that we know of are proof of that. They are going to be good. They are going to be well coached. Let's see who can try to take advantage of them.
Well, let's go through those teams that are going to try and take advantage of them, starting on the road in Ottawa against the GGs. September, they're hosting Waterloo and Carleton back to back before going to Laurier, then hosting the Queen's Golden Gales to wrap up September. Their season finishes up on the road at Mac, on the road at U of T, and a game that we already highlighted in breaking down Windsor in the B tier, which is, of course, at home, week 9, against the Windsor Lancers. I mean, Tom, we don't need to belabor the point. Best case scenario is obviously 8-0. Like there's nothing interesting we can add to this that like, oh, could they go to Ottawa and win? Yeah. Could they play like it? Yes.
Yes.
Our worst case scenario is 6-2. Tom, start us off, looking at these games, where did we come up with that?
So obviously, when you go through everything, exactly like you said, Western has won at home and everywhere else in the country or in the province, bare minimum. They know how to win 8-0 very simply. However, when you look at these games, the reason we say 6-2 and not 7-1, obviously you look at Laurier. Laurier had played them very close, especially in that regular season game. They have every capability to potentially win here. The other team to really remember is Windsor. Now, Windsor, I believe it was 2 years ago, they travel to London and they play against the Western Mustangs. And while the score ended up being something like 40-19, right until the third quarter, that score was actually 21-19. And that Windsor was in that game from the get-go. They were competing against the Western Mustangs, but there is something to note of Western has the capability of, hey, you know what? We've been in these tight scenarios before. We have the capabilities to come back and play. We still think that if Windsor is playing at the very top tier and Western has the worst game, that has the capabilities to potentially come away with this one. Yeah.
Just super quick, because it's also just bloody entertaining to think about.
Mhm.
It's a game that's 25-18 going into the fourth quarter. Western scores 25 points in the fourth quarter to win 50-18. Tom.
Thank you, sir. Yes. But once again, going back to my point, it's a close game and Windsor feels like they're right in there, but that's standard the way that Western plays. That's kind of how that comes up. But I think Windsor, with a couple of years under their belt, with a defense that is poised to be once again the best in the country, or at least in the OUA, and an offense that the run game has obviously been established. Whether it's Danny Skelton or if it's Nick Domovsky, should have some more confidence, some more play history, something else to kind of lean on here. I think that last game, and like we detailed in the B tier podcast, there's a possibility that Western plays against Windsor last game of the season, and they're both 7-0, fighting for the number one spot with the bye. So massive playoff implications. We do see a scenario where Windsor could potentially come away with that one. However, it's more likely that these guys are going to go 8-0 rather than anything.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, the 7-1 possibility smack dab in the middle of that.
Sure.
Three opponents that we've already highlighted, yeah, can really give you fits on any given day. Even going back to their matchup last year, when Windsor hosted Western, a game that was math 10-8 for Windsor at the half,
Mm-hmm.
and then Western's defense shuts the door in the second half. Western puts up 13 in the fourth quarter to take that one 21-10. Which I mean, hey, like again, even when you don't get Western's, I say this with the air quotes, best performance, that they're still so scary in
Mm-hmm.
your barn or in theirs that again, as much as we can look on paper and when it comes to that week 4 matchup when Western goes to Laurier, regardless of who we're picking in those games, just a little reminder, a little programming note, like, if you want to rub it in our face, if Western wins that game, if we're picking against them, so be it. But
Mm-hmm.
again, with where the OUA is at right now, you'd be a darn fool to not think that it's not that this team's vulnerable. It's not like a team where, obviously they lost some guys and some guys we're unclear about. But it's not just a factor of, oh man, this team took a step back and who's gonna come up and step up. It's just that these other teams are getting so good that again, from our vantage point, it just makes it so much more entertaining to just sit back, relax, and watch some spectacular OUA football.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, we've made it through the tiers to the championship tier, highlighting why Laurier and Western are forces to be reckoned with. Obviously, as we said, we still are going to do the sort of full big picture preview podcast that you'll be getting from us tomorrow. I'm doing the thing
Mm-hmm.
where I'm not putting my mindset in the day we're recording. Put that aside. Um, Last words on these two clubs, any of these other tiers, just this whole process as we sit here on the doorstep of the 2024 OUA season.
It's interesting because despite the fact of both of these teams, both of them, I think, are going to go into this season with chips on their shoulders. Obviously, Laurier is going to come out there. Laurier needs to get the job done. We've been having a lot of conversations about outstanding play and oh my gosh, this offense is completely coming back and they were the top tier in passing and all of this other stuff. Talking to the guys that are there, talking to a guy like Taylor Elgersma, talking to a guy like Quentin Scott, Tanner Nelms, any of those dudes that you want to pick out, pick any name, having all of those other accolades about, yeah, you're the number one offense or you were MVP and all this stuff doesn't mean anything. They want a championship. That's what everybody's coming back for. That's why you get guys like a Harnu Dhaliwal who could have stayed at Ottawa but came to Laurier. That's why you have the culture that you do, is because you're fighting for championships, and that's what you want to get to. So obviously there's a ton of pressure there to get the job done. On the Western side of things, you have three Yates Cups to kind of lean back on. You've got the undefeated seasons ever since Evan Hillock came out in the OUA. That's certainly things that you can hang your hat on and all that stuff. Western doesn't care about those. Once again, they're fighting for Vanier Cups every year. That's what their expectation is. And to lose 2 years in a row to a team out of the RSEQ, and I don't want to say an embarrassing fashion by any means, but you certainly did not play your best game against both of those squads. You best know that they're coming back because they've got Vanier Cup on their mind. They're coming back because they want to showcase, hey, you know what? The OUA is still the top tier in U Sports here, and we want to showcase that. We want to prove that by going up against the best that U Sports has to offer. So Western somehow, some way is going to come into this program, coming into this year with a chip on their own shoulders as well, with something to prove that, yeah, every single year we are the top dog. We are the guys that you have to go through. Any Yates Cup that any other team in this conference wants to get has to come through London, has to come through Western. So there's such a confidence that's there with these guys. Both of these squads have a lot of similarities, but once again, one of them has been to the dance, one of them has gotten the job done consistently, the other one has not as of yet. So we'll see. It's a new year. There's a lot of returning faces. There's a lot of similarities here, but as always, the eyes will be on both of these teams that share, maybe there's a difference, but that share purple in their color schemes. We'll see who is able to come out of this one. If it's going to be a Western four-peat, if there's going to be a Laurier finally coming over the top here, or somebody else coming in, because once again, this is probably one of the most top to bottom competitive OUA seasons that we're about to walk into that I can remember in recent history.
That was so good, Tom. I mean, put simply, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that ring. Let's take a moment to be a little braggadocious about our little province here. As verified or validated by Team Ontario at the Canada Cup this summer, I love the fact that we are not only the largest university conference in all of Canada, but we're deepest as well. You know what? It's one thing to have 11 teams, then you know what? It works out that a couple of your teams, you get 11 shots at it. Yeah, you're gonna have the best teams. We're the biggest and we're the deepest, and our top talent can play with anyone else. So remember that, Western. When you win these Yates Cups, you represent all of us. Hey, and you know what? You said that stat earlier about getting the bye and how that translates to Yates Cups. Tom, that's because it's always Western getting a bye, and more often than not, they're winning Yates Cup. So at the end of the day, it's Western football's universe. We're all just living in it. As we mentioned, we're still going to do a little preview, just kind of looking at everything and everything all at once. I'll repeat this on that pod, but I'll say it now as well. Don't spare a moment tuning in to even just one football game a week, because there isn't a week of football where there is not intrigue in at least one, and more than often than not, many of these games, whether it's about the competition between individuals vying for top dog, guys trying to upgrade their stock from East-West, getting ready for the CFL draft next year, or for that prize, that heavy, beautiful piece of oak trophy that you and I have had the pleasure of lifting and drinking out of, that no trophy in this country even can compare to. There are storylines in droves, left, right, and center. Make sure to be following along all season long, and there's no place better to be doing that than by following our content. We'll have a podcast for you breaking down all these things as well, and I'll say it again, you can see us in Guelph and in Hamilton for the first day of the OUA season on August 24th. So whether it's on the pod, in person, or anywhere in between, you can catch us right here at the 55.